The runaway bride. Clara Whitfield pressed her gloved hands together and tried not to tremble. The train rattled and hissed as it pushed westward, cutting across endless miles of prairie. Passengers spoke in hushed tones, but she could not make out their words. She was too busy counting the beats of her heart, each one a hammer striking against her ribs. A mail-order bride. That was what she had been reduced to. Her father's debts and her mother's sickness had left the family desperate, and when a man in Dakota Territory sent word he was looking for a wife, Clara had been chosen. She had agreed, outwardly calm, but inside she felt like cattle being sent to market. The man, Mr. Horace Braxton, had sent money for her ticket and a curt letter demanding obedience and silence. Clara carried the folded page in her satchel. Every time she touched it, her stomach turned. As the train lurched around a bend, two men seated a few rows behind her chuckled in low voices. Braxton paid a fair sum for her, one said. He's getting a young one, too. Heard he likes to keep a tight rein. The other snorted. Tighter than a noose. More like. Clara's chest constricted. Heat rose to her face. They were speaking of her, so casually, as if she were not a woman with thoughts and feelings, but a parcel to be delivered. She looked around, panic sparking in her throat. The conductor strolled down the aisle, glancing at tickets. At the rear door, wind howled through a crack, tugging at her skirts. She thought of her mother's frail smile, of her younger brothers who had hugged her goodbye, and of her father's silence, ashamed but resolved. She thought of Braxton's letter, each sentence heavy with warning. And then, without fully deciding, Clara rose. The train slowed slightly as it approached a hill, its wheels grinding. She clutched her satchel, hurried down the aisle, and pushed through the rear door. Cold air struck her, sharp as knives. The fields rolled by in a blur of browns and greens. Her heart thundered louder than the iron wheels. You can't, a voice in her mind warned. You'll die out there. But another voice answered, better to die free than live in a cage. With a gasp, Clara leapt. The ground slammed into her shoulder, knocking the breath from her lungs. She rolled, dirt and grass scraping her skin, and came to rest in a ditch. For a long moment, she could only lie there, stunned, while the train shrieked past and disappeared into the horizon. She was alone, terrified, bruised, yet free. Clara forced herself upright. The prairie stretched in all directions, endless sky above, the scent of dust and dry grass filling her nose. She had no map, no plan, only the satchel with a little bread and water. She started walking. Hours passed. The sun slid lower, burning orange against the horizon. Hunger gnawed, thirst deepened, and every sound of rustling grass made her flinch. But she kept moving, driven by the stubborn spark inside her. At last, as dusk gathered, she saw it. A crooked fence line, half fallen. Beyond it, a sagging barn with holes in the roof, and a weather-worn farmhouse crouched against the wind. A faint glow of lamplight shimmered in one window. Her knees nearly buckled with relief. Shelter! She crossed the yard, boots crunching on gravel, and lifted her hand to knock. Before her knuckles touched wood, the door jerked open. A tall man filled the doorway, lantern in one hand, rifle in the other. His face was shadowed by a beard and a furrowed brow. His clothes were rough, patched and worn. His eyes, cold, wary, but startlingly alive, locked on her. "What in God's name are you doing on my land?" he demanded. Clara swallowed hard, every nerve screaming to flee. But she forced herself to speak, voice thin but steady. "Please, I need shelter. Just for tonight. I'll work for it, I swear." The man studied her in silence, the lantern's glow flickering across his scarred cheek. He looked like someone who had seen too much, endured too much, and trusted too little. Finally, he lowered the rifle a fraction. "You're running from something," he said flatly. Clara's lips trembled, but she did not deny it. "I can't go back." The wind whistled through the broken fences. Somewhere in the barn, a horse stomped restlessly. The man's jaw tightened. For a long, unbearable moment, she thought he would turn her away. Then, with a gruff sigh, he stepped aside. "Come in, but don't think this is charity. You'll earn your keep if you stay under my roof." Clara nearly wept with relief. She crossed the threshold into the dim, dusty warmth of the farmhouse. The door shut behind her with a heavy thud, sealing her away from the open, merciless prairie. She was safe for now, and though she did not yet know it, she had just stepped into the life of Elias Boone, the man whose neglected farm and scarred heart would change her fate forever. The forgotten farmer. The farmhouse smelled of smoke, old wood, and loneliness. Clara sat stiffly at the table, while Elias Boone moved about with the slow, deliberate motions of a man who lived by habit rather than joy. He set a tin cup of water before her, then leaned against the wall, studying her like one might study a stray animal. Up close, Clara saw the lines of wear on his face, the scars that trailed across his jaw, the guardedness in his eyes. He was not an old man, perhaps in his 30s, but hardship had carved years into his expression. "You can sleep in the spare room," he said finally. "Don't expect much. Roof leaks when it rains. Bed's lumpy." Clara murmured a thank you, clutching the cup in both hands. Her heart still raced from the leap from the train, from the thought of search parties scouring the countryside. She had landed in the home of a stranger, but something in Elias's bluntness steadied her. He was not kind exactly, but he was honest. The next morning, she rose early, her resolve clear. If she was to stay, she must not be a burden. She found a broom leaning in the corner and began sweeping the kitchen. Dust stirred, drifting in shafts of light that cut through the cracked shutters. When Elias entered, boots thudding against the floorboards, he paused. "What do you think you're doing?" "Cleaning," Clara replied simply. "If I am to remain here, I'll earn my place." His brow lifted, as though he hadn't expected such directness. He said nothing, only grunted and moved on. Over the following days, Clara took to small tasks, patching a torn curtain, scrubbing the soot-blackened stove, mending a shirt she found draped over a chair. Elias watched with suspicion at first, but gradually his silence grew less sharp. He began to offer terse instructions: where the well was, which fence posts were most likely to collapse, how to keep the mule from biting. One evening, while Clara kneaded dough at the table, Elias sat opposite her, sharpening a knife. The rasp of metal against stone filled the quiet. "You're running from someone," he said at last, not as a question, but as a fact. Clara's hands froze on the dough. She met his eyes, then looked down. "Yes." "Dangerous?" "Yes," she whispered. Elias nodded once and said no more. He did not pry, but Clara sensed a storm of thoughts hidden behind his steady gaze. Life on the neglected farm was harsh, yet strangely grounding. Fences sagged, weeds choked the fields, and the barn leaned like a weary soldier. But Clara worked with determination, her hands blistering yet unwilling to stop. She found solace in the rhythm of chores, the way labor quieted the chaos in her mind. Elias, for his part, seemed to come alive in her presence, though he would never admit it. He began fixing things alongside her, patching a hole in the barn roof, tightening the hinges on the gate. More than once, Clara caught him watching her, as if trying to understand why she hadn't fled after seeing the ruin of his farm. One afternoon, while gathering firewood, Clara heard the distant sound of hooves and men's voices. Panic jolted her chest. She darted back to the farmhouse, skirts catching on brambles. "Riders," she gasped. Elias strode to the porch, rifle in hand. Two men on horseback rode past the far edge of the property, scanning the horizon. Clara ducked behind the doorframe, heart hammering. "They're searching for me," she whispered when the riders disappeared. Elias's eyes narrowed. "The man you were promised to?" She nodded, her throat dry. For a long moment, Elias said nothing. Then he leaned the rifle against the wall and looked at her with an intensity that pinned her in place. "If you're here, you'll work. If they come here, you'll hide. Do you understand?" "Yes," she breathed. From that night on, Clara sensed an unspoken pact between them. Elias would not turn her out, and she, in return, would breathe life into the place he had nearly abandoned. The transformation was subtle but real. Where dust had gathered, order returned. Where silence had lingered, small words were exchanged. Clara hummed softly while she worked, and Elias, though still brooding, no longer seemed like a man entirely lost to solitude. One evening, as the sun bled red across the prairie, Clara stood at the doorway and looked over the broken land. She imagined what it might have been once: fields tilled, fences strong, a home filled with laughter. A home worth saving. "You should leave." Elias's voice came from behind her. Clara turned, startled. He leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "Why?" she asked. "This farm's no place for someone like you," he muttered. "It's nothing but work and dust. I've got nothing left to give." Clara's chin lifted, her voice firm. "Then I'll give. This place, it's not dead yet. Neither are you." For a heartbeat, silence hung between them, broken only by the wind sighing through the grass. Elias's expression flickered, some old pain warring with something softer. He looked away, jaw tightening. "You're stubborn." Clara allowed herself the faintest smile. "So I've been told." That night, as she lay in the spare room, Clara realized something unexpected. She had fled to survive, but here, on this neglected farm with this wounded man, she was beginning to live. The storm and the reckoning. The sky turned a sickly green as dusk fell, clouds piling high and black. Clara stood at the porch, clutching the railing, watching the prairie bend under the rising wind. The air smelled of rain and ozone, sharp and metallic. Elias came up behind her, his face grim. "Storm's coming fast. Bad one." "What do we do?" she asked, heart quickening. "Save what we can." He pulled on his coat and strode toward the barn. Clara ran after him, skirts snapping in the wind. The animals were already restless, stamping and snorting. Elias worked quickly, tying down the gate, securing the mule's stall. Clara hauled buckets, spread hay, and latched doors with trembling fingers. The barn groaned as the gale battered its sides. When the rain finally broke, it came in sheets, slamming against the roof, seeping through the holes in the boards. Water pooled on the dirt floor, soaking Clara's hem. Lightning split the sky, followed by thunder so loud it rattled her teeth. "Help me with this beam." Elias shouted over the roar. A heavy support had shifted, threatening to collapse. Together they heaved, Clara bracing her shoulder against the wood while Elias shoved it back into place. Her muscles screamed, but she refused to yield. For hours they fought, moving feed sacks to higher ground, coaxing the terrified mule, shoving loose boards into gaps. Every gust threatened to tear the barn apart, but neither gave in. By the time the storm passed, they were drenched, filthy, and exhausted, but the animals lived and the barn still stood. Clara leaned against the stall, hair plastered to her cheeks, chest heaving. Elias dropped beside her, mud streaking his face. For a long while they sat in silence, listening to the rain soften to a patter. Finally, Elias spoke, voice low. "You didn't quit." Clara gave a weary laugh. "I couldn't." His gaze lingered on her, something unspoken in his eyes. "Most would have run." "I've been running long enough," she replied. The words settled between them, heavy with truth. Later, back in the farmhouse, Clara brewed weak coffee over the stove. The room glowed with lantern light, and steam rose from their clothes as they sat near the fire. Elias stared into the flames, jaw tight. "I wasn't always like this," he said suddenly. Clara glanced at him. His voice was rough, yet beneath it she heard a vulnerability she hadn't before. "This farm," he gestured vaguely toward the window, "it was my family's. My father built it with his hands. My brothers and I worked it together. Then the war came. I left. By the time I came back," his voice cracked, "they were gone. Sickness took them. The land was dying. And he shook his head, eyes shadowed. I didn't see the point in saving what was already lost." Clara's heart ached. She set her cup down, words trembling on her tongue. "I know what it is to lose everything you thought was certain." He looked at her then, really looked, and for the first time, Clara told him the truth. "I was sold," she whispered, "to a man named Horace Braxton. My family was desperate. They thought it was salvation. But his letters, the way he spoke of me, it wasn't marriage he wanted, it was possession. I couldn't do it. So I ran." Elias's eyes hardened at the name. His hand tightened on the arm of his chair. "Braxton," he said, as though spitting out poison. I've heard of him. Cruel bastard. Clara nodded, throat tight. He'll come for me. Men like him don't let go. The fire crackled, throwing sparks. For a moment, only the wind outside answered. Then Elias leaned forward, his expression like carved stone. If he comes here, Elias said, voice low and fierce, he'll find a fight waiting. Clara's pulse quickened, a mix of fear and something else, something like safety. She searched his face, saw the soldier he once was flickering to life. We can't outmatch him, she said. Maybe not, Elias admitted, but I fought worse odds. And this farm. His eyes swept the worn walls, the patched roof. This place is mine. I won't let him take it. Or you. Clara swallowed hard, warmth flooding her chest despite the chill in the room. She had never been anyone's choice before. Only obligation, transaction. But Elias's words carried no bargain, no ownership, only resolve. That night, they made a plan. Elias walked her through the farm's weak points. The broken fence Braxton's men might breach, the blind corners where a man could hide. He showed her where rifles and ammunition were stored, old but serviceable. Clara listened, asked questions, memorized every detail. You're not afraid? He asked once, studying her face. I'm terrified, she admitted. But fear doesn't mean surrender. Elias's mouth twitched, almost a smile. You're stubborn as the prairie itself. In the quiet hours before dawn, Clara lay awake in the spare bed, listening to the wind die down. Fear gnawed at her, but beneath it ran a steadier current, strength. She and Elias had weathered the storm together. They could weather more. And though she did not yet know when, she knew the day would come when Horace Braxton's shadow would fall across this farm. When it did, she would not run again. She would stand. Fire on the horizon. The morning broke heavy and still, the kind of silence that presses against the ears. Clara was hauling water from the well when she saw the dust cloud rising on the horizon. Her hands froze on the bucket's handle. Riders. She ran to the farmhouse, skirts tangling around her legs. Elias. He appeared in the doorway, rifle already in hand. His eyes followed hers to the advancing figures. 6 riders, Braxton at their head, his broad shoulders unmistakable even at a distance. They found me, Clara whispered. Elias's jaw tightened. Then we meet them here. Together, they moved with purpose. Elias handed her a smaller rifle, old but steady. You know what to do. Clara swallowed hard and nodded. She remembered their nights of planning, the weak points they had turned into defenses. The fallen beam across the yard, the water trough tipped as cover, the lanterns hidden and ready. The riders thundered closer, hooves pounding like war drums. Clara's palms slicked with sweat, but her grip held firm. Elias stood tall beside her. The calm of a soldier returned to battle. They reined up at the edge of the yard, dust swirling around them. Braxton's face came into view, cruel and flushed with triumph. Clara Whitfield, he called, voice oily with satisfaction. You've given me quite the chase. Time to come home. Clara stepped forward, rifle steady despite the fear twisting inside her. I'm not your home, and I never will be. Braxton's smile sharpened. You think this hermit can protect you? He's nothing. This land is nothing. You belong to me. Elias's voice rang out, hard as iron. She belongs to no man. Not you. Not me. If you want her, you'll have to take her from both of us. For a moment, silence reigned. Then Braxton's hand flicked, and his men began to dismount. The fight began with a shout and a crack of gunfire. Elias's rifle boomed, dropping one man to the dirt. Clara ducked behind the trough, heart hammering, and fired at another. The shot grazed his arm, sending him sprawling with a curse. Chaos consumed the yard. Smoke, shouts, the ringing of metal against wood. Elias moved with deadly precision. The ghost of the soldier he once was blazing back to life. He fired, reloaded, shifted position with a calm Clara envied. But Braxton's men pressed hard, circling wide, try to flank. Clara spotted one creeping toward the barn. She sprinted across the mud, skirts snagging, and hurled a lantern through the open door. It shattered, flames licking at the hay. The startled man yelped, stumbling back as fire roared to life, cutting off their advance. Elias shouted for her, but Clara raised her rifle and fired again, forcing another rider to retreat. The smoke stung her eyes, but adrenaline kept her moving. She was no longer just surviving. She was fighting. Braxton bellowed, his face red with rage. He charged forward, pistol raised. Elias met him head-on, their shots echoing in near unison. Braxton's bullet tore Elias's sleeve, grazing flesh. Elias's round struck Braxton's horse, sending it crashing down. Braxton rolled free, snarling, and lunged at Elias with a knife. The two men grappled in the mud, strength against strength, fury against resolve. Clara raised her rifle, but hesitated, afraid to hit Elias. She dropped it and ran, snatching up a heavy branch from the yard. "Elias!" she cried, swinging with every ounce of her strength. The branch cracked against Braxton's back, staggering him. Elias seized the moment, wrenching the knife away and hurling him to the ground. Breathless, bruised, Braxton glared up at them. "You think you've won? You're nothing but dirt and dust. She'll crawl back to me when this farm rots." Elias leveled the rifle at his chest, eyes blazing. "This farm may be broken, but it stands. We stand, and you'll never set foot here again." Braxton's men, seeing their leader beaten, mounted in haste and fled. The sound of hooves faded into the horizon, leaving only the crackle of the burning barn and the ragged breaths of the victors. Clara dropped to her knees, trembling. Elias reached for her, pulling her close, his chest heaving against hers. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then, quietly, she said, "It's over." Elias shook his head. "No, it's beginning." Together, they doused the barn with buckets of water, saving what they could. By nightfall, the flames were out, leaving blackened timbers but enough still standing to rebuild. The farm was scarred but alive. Later, as they sat on the porch, bruised and weary, Clara leaned her head against Elias's shoulder. The prairie stretched wide and endless before them, the stars emerging like silent witnesses. "I thought I had no place," she whispered. "No choice but to be owned. But here with you, I found something worth fighting for." Elias's arm tightened around her, and I thought I had nothing left. But you reminded me, land can heal. People can heal, if they're willing to fight for it. The night air was cool, carrying the scent of wet earth and smoke. Clara closed her eyes, exhaustion pulling at her, but her heart was steady. She was no longer running, no longer trapped. She was home.